How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga. Today is Tuesday, July 23rd. Some more stories around the NFL that I wanted to talk with you guys on today's show. Very heavy episode on quarterbacks. In the first half of the show, we're going to talk about a potential disconnect between Jalen Hurts and his head coach, Nick Sirianni. Does it matter? Is it a big deal? I'll give my thoughts on that. Then more on Aaron Rodgers explaining his trip to Egypt that cost him to miss mandatory minicamp. He explains, his reasoning behind it and going further into just the structure of the offseason in general. And also Stephen Jones talking about the general feeling around the optimism level on the extensions for his big three players. Talking about Dak, CD, and what it means for the team and their potential Super Bowl window potentially closing in 2024. That and some more topics on today's show. Before I get started, I want to remind you guys, as I always do, if you have any question or comment you want to make, use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your question or comment in my chat box. I'll read it out loud, and that way get your guys' thoughts on anything I say or on any of our topics. It's a lot more interactive. It's also a massive help for the show and the network. So please, if you guys would, use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. We would greatly appreciate it every time you guys are able to do that. But starting right away, right off the bat, with an interesting development, something that I don't want to say predicted or felt that I knew that this was going to happen, but you could kind of get a sense of this topic that we're going to start off here today with Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. First off, they're entering the fourth year of this partnership going into 2024. Sirianni was hired in 2021, and the first year as Jalen Hurts, starting as the official quarterback for the Eagles, was also 2021. And since then, they've made the playoffs in each of those years. The wild card round in 2021, they made the Super Bowl in 2022, and then most recently lost in the wild card round in 2023. For the most part, the performances and the production has been there, just plainly, generally, if you look at it, pretty successful in terms of this startup that they've had as a partnership. But what is now being brought up by the Athletic's Diana Russini, she recently wrote how their relationship, the one between Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni, obviously, is still a work in progress, as she would put it. In her words, because of their different personalities. And if you watched any of the Eagles, maybe you're an Eagles fan or something like that, I don't think that's too hard to point out. Honestly, if you look at Sirianni, he's more of a fiery, more animated on the sidelines, it seems, more emotional. Whereas you look at Jalen Hurts, every answer, you hardly ever see him, change his facial expression or be overly excited. He's more reserved, more of a calming presence. And that's something you'd like in a quarterback, just calming everybody down, having that killer mentality. But this led to there being a disconnect, according to Russini, last year between the two of them at times during the season, and also earlier this offseason after, mandatory minicamp, when Jalen Hurts was asked by local media about Nick Sirianni potentially changing his coaching style this year, obviously taking a step back, letting Kellen Moore, operate more of the offense, changing the identity from what Nick Sirianni was used to. Jalen Hurts kind of gave a non-answer. Jalen Hurts didn't condemn Nick Sirianni or the way he was running things, but he also didn't stick his chest out for him and say that it had nothing to do with him. He wasn't at fault or anything like that. He gave he gave a politically correct answer to that, and a lot of people in the media, local Philadelphia media, and just some fans I saw didn't really take it the right way. Some of them felt that Jalen should have stood up for his coach a bit more, supported him more with his answer, and that didn't sit too well with them. But I'll give my thoughts on that after this next thing that I wanted to bring up in regards to their relationship was that that first part about Jalen's answer is indifferent to me almost, but this next part spoke more to me just because if you remember a couple of years ago during that Super Bowl that they made in 2022, there was a brief moment that the camera showed Nick Sirianni and the sideline of the Eagles. He was standing next to Jalen Hurts, and there was a play that they were challenging, a no catch by a Kansas City Chiefs receiver. Nick Sirianni challenged it, and you can see when the camera cuts to the image of Jalen standing next to Sirianni, he was sort of like waving his hand back to the Chiefs, telling them, to come back. You guys got it wrong. It's going to be a no catch, so come on back. He was waving at him, sort of smiling, kind of poking fun at it. Overly confident, you can say, that he was going to win the challenge. And quickly, Jalen Hurts standing next to him, actually, kind of put his hand down, kind of pushed it down, almost like an embarrassed dad or something like that, with his kid doing something that he shouldn't be. That's the kind of vibe I got. It was pretty awkward when I saw it live. I don't think anybody pointed it out, really. And that always stuck in my head with just how this relationship, the dynamic of it is. You always see Nick Sirianni, I think, against the Chiefs this year, where they won in Arrowhead. You saw the clip of him celebrating in the tunnel, screaming to the Chiefs fans, and just being overly emotional about it, where I don't think I saw a single thing about Jalen Hurts or his expression of emotions at any point while he was actually playing in the game. So it's those kind of things that you can start to pick up on and realize that, yeah, they're a little bit different. And sometimes probably they don't agree on things. If Jalen Hurts is telling Nick Sirianni, like, yo, like, calm down, like, you're doing too much almost in a way. But, he quickly pushed his hand down, and then that was that on that moment. Then Rossini goes on to talk about a little bit more that, she suggested in her mind that they don't have to be friends, but at least on the same page when it comes to running the offense, because that was also another thing that kind of sparked this disconnect, you could say, that Brian Johnson, the former offensive coordinator last year, didn't have a great run of form at all, but he was very close with Jalen Hurts, and some reports suggest that even though Brian Johnson was the offensive coordinator, Nick Sirianni was still running his offense through Brian Johnson, and some sources say that dynamic, the way the offense was still being run, didn't really line up with Jalen Hurts, calling it conservative at times, but that was another thing just to add on to this. And now I can get back to the idea of just touching on this. Does this disconnect, does this different dynamic, different personalities really matter? And is it a big deal for them, to have to fix it? Is this something that they must address immediately? Well, going back to that minicamp answer that Jalen Hurts gave, that non-answer that I mentioned, that really doesn't matter to me. Like I said, I don't really find too much stock in condemning Hurts for not being overly protective of Nick Sirianni. It's not like they were asking him should he be fired or anything like that. They just asked him about him taking a step back, changing his offense in 2024, which I think most people would agree that there should be a change anyway, just because they didn't perform up to standard. But he gave an answer that fits his personality. Jalen, like I said, isn't overly animated, isn't overly emotional, not too outspoken, I guess, for a lack of a better terms. The reserved quarterback gave a reserved answer, and everyone's taking it as a surprise. That really didn't bother me. The Super Bowl video, the action of him pushing his hand down, that really spoke more to me, honestly, because if Diana Rossini describes this relationship right now as a work in progress, and they've been together for the last 4 years, entering their 4th year now, if it's a work in progress still right now, could you only imagine what it was in year 1, where they made it to the wild card round? Then after that, in their 2nd year, they were right away in the Super Bowl. If it's still work in progress right now, you can only imagine what it was back then. But you know what? Nobody talked about it. It seemed like nobody cared or nobody made a story about it because they were in the Super Bowl. They were in the playoffs. They were dominating everybody, and nobody talked about this other stuff. So really, I look at it as something you don't really have to fix or put all your attention on it. You don't have to make this a bigger deal internally or in the Eagles locker room as it is in the media, just because, again, this could all go away. Everything is solved with them just winning games. And last year, obviously, they were 10-1. Again, nobody was really bringing this up until they went on that losing streak. They crashed out of the playoffs, and now this is starting to come up because you're wondering what led to that, what led to such a dramatic decline in this Eagles team that seemed to be dominating, but then just blew out their tires and just crashed out of the playoffs. But yeah, really, I agree with Rossini when she says that you don't have to be friends. You just look at the biggest example in Tom and Bill Belichick. Yeah, they're friends right now. They're all very much looking like they are close friends, like they are close personally, and they might have been more than I'm giving them credit in their playing days. But at the time, if you look at them, their relationships on the sidelines, the answers that they gave, they never really showed too much love or they weren't overly emotional with each other than when they won the Super Bowl. I think that's perfectly fine. They don't have to be best friends, but as long as they're performing, that's the biggest thing, really. And the last thing I'll touch on this about this subject is that Diana Rossini pointed out the idea of running the offense and how that could have led to a potential disconnect, a disagreement between the two of them. I think that was interesting because I talked about it a little bit yesterday, how giving the keys over to Kellen Moore a little bit now is probably the right thing to do about it. But now, with this report coming out, it makes me think that this could have played more of a bigger role than initially we thought it could have been, because if you're thinking from the point of Sirianni and you just had a pretty poor season, honestly, with the expectations on this Eagles team, if the offense was a major concern and you're the one running the offense, you start to think that Sirianni might think it's better for him to take a step back and not put his job so much in jeopardy, if that makes sense, relinquishing this role in the offense, because he knows if it continues to struggle and they don't really change anything in 2024, the first person that's going to be out the door, unfortunately, is going to be Sirianni. I think he potentially could have come to a realization that that could be the case. So instead of, continuing to do the same exact thing, he had a change of heart, put his ego aside, let Kellen Moore run the offense now, because, again, they're not going to get rid of Jalen Hurts. He's probably going to be the one to leave the organization, be fired if they don't change something and they don't see results in 2024. So right away, that got me thinking about that. Maybe that's the reason why Sirianni was just so adamant about giving the keys over to Kellen Moore, why he was so accepting about it, because, again, yesterday, a lot of coaches aren't really too open to doing that, but Sirianni, thinking bigger picture, thinking bigger than himself, did it. And now I think it's the best for this team. Again, to just finish off the topic, they don't have to be friends. They don't have to be calling each other every other day, checking up on each other, but they do have to perform, and that's the biggest thing. They have the best chance of doing it, I believe, now in 2024. They're absolutely stacked, so we'll see how much more interactive they are potentially. Everything's always better when you're winning. So when you're losing, of course, you're going to be a little bit colder, a little bit more serious, but winning solves everything, and I think they're going to do a lot of that in 2024. But we will leave that topic there for right now. We're going to be talking about Aaron Rodgers again, touching on his absence from minicamp, why he did it, and also expanding on just minicamp in general and how different it actually is from OTAs. We're going to touch on that topic after the break, so don't go anywhere. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.